Okay. This week's background mural that we're starting off with is actually another mural from our utility box art program. So the great box art cover up that we started. It's kind of a spacey design, as you can see, which is actually perfect because it's next to Bank of the West on Iowa. So it's the what some people call this mini spaceship. It's that classic kind of neo or new architecture from the 50s of trying to envision what the future would be looking like. So that's our background. That's the mural that was on the utility box. It's right next to that Bank of the West. And it is a pretty iconic portion of Sunnyvale to some degree, but I think the space age theme kind of matches that to a large degree. Let's go ahead. Good morning, Sunnyvale. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thanks for joining me again this week. We are at the 111th installment of my weekly office hours. Happy Friday. Welcome to the end of April. I hope everyone's doing well. We have now reached 773 days since the March 16, 2020 county health order started the shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. You know, over 2 years ago, I converted my weekly coffee shop hours into this weekly live stream address and haven't missed a week since. People still say they enjoy hearing from their mayor each week, whether or not they're watching it live or watching it delayed. But it's a great way for me to, look back over the last 2 weeks, but also, give you some updates, some news, answer some of your questions, and give you some words of encouragement. If you have questions, go ahead and add them to the comment section. Didn't get many questions this week, so it's kind of an odd sort of week. I don't know if people are on vacation or what, but things are pretty quiet. Thanks for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale. Most Fridays I'm now continuing to have the in-person meetings after this live stream address at Bean Scene on Murphy Avenue. If you want to reserve a time slot, just email me and you can reserve a 15-minute or 30-minute time slot. If you have a quick question, just drop by, and every now and then I have an open time frame in the few hours that I spend at Bean Scene after this. So, good to see people back in person and that's always fantastic. More than 6 months ago, I started changing my background art. And this week's art is called Gears, Ruins of the Lightner Mine from Angels Camp, California. It's by Mary Williamson. And so if you're interested in this art or similar art, and you want to get in contact with the artist, and I have a large group of Sunnyvale Art Club artists that lend me paintings every week, just contact me and I'll put you in contact with that artist. Let's go ahead and get started and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last 2 weeks. Last Monday, it's amazing how quickly this has passed. A federal judge in Florida struck down the CDC order requiring people to nationwide to wear masks on public transportation. So, that travel mask mandate had been in place for about 15 months, and it was implemented shortly after President Biden was inaugurated last year. This is kind of was a little surprising, but it wasn't specifically on the mask mandate. It was seen as unlawful kind of from a standpoint of the CDC's authority was it being exceeded. And so that's what the judge was ruling as far as the mask mandate was. There are lots of discussions at the beginning of last week between the CDC and the Justice Department on whether or not they would appeal that decision. They ultimately did later that week, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then last Tuesday, I was in Braley Park to celebrate Arbor Day and Earth Month. And so we were planting 10 trees. And so the fifth graders from Braley Elementary were there to help city staff plant the 10 trees donated by our sister city, Iska, Japan. And so they were cherry trees So it's cherry blossoms, and they've done this every year for multiple years now. So you can kind of, if you go to Braley Park, you can see that it's pretty much ringed with cherry blossoms. Ultimately, I think we'll probably have another year or two left before we finish planting cherry blossoms until we kind of ringed the entire park. So it's actually good from that standpoint to plant a tree, and it was good to see the kids learning, how to best plant trees, as well as, how to stake them in the ground and all that. So kudos to city staff, and thanks to Braley Elementary. We postponed it until after spring break, and I think the kids really enjoyed it. So it was good to be out there to celebrate, Arbor Day and of course Earth Month, which we're at the end of. And then last Tuesday, VTA announced that it would be ending the mask mandate on buses and light rail from a VTA standpoint. And so it was the first major Bay Area transit agency to kind of change course as far as that mandate was concerned. It's still, suggested, it's highly suggested from that. It's recommended for all the passengers to be wearing masks, but it was mainly that they didn't want their staff to actually enforce that. And so totally understand that, and the following day, BART and Caltrain lifted their mask mandate. So, ultimately they came in line with that. But then, of course, late on Wednesday, BART board members actually said that they would be discussing reinstating the mask mandate this week, and we'll talk about that later. And then last Wednesday, the Justice Department did finally file an appeal for that ruling on the mask mandate for mass transportation. They didn't specifically ask for a stay of the mask order, meaning that ultimately they signaled that it was more about trying to define what the CDC's ability is from a legal standpoint is, as opposed to what the mask mandate itself is. So they weren't specifically looking at that. They were looking at what the limits of the CDC order is, and whether or not they could put in similar orders in the future if need be. So that's kind of working its way through the courts. There's been discussions on whether or not they would actually add that, request that stay of appeal, but ultimately they haven't as of this date, and so you'll see that the masks are still no longer required, strongly recommended, but no longer required on public transportation unless that transit agency decides differently. And then last Thursday morning was Coffee with a Cop at Coffee and More on Murphy Avenue. It's good to see everybody back, and it was good to talk with some of the officers about their experiences, but it's good to see, kids and parents and residents come by to meet meet our cops and firefighters. It was, Coffee with a Cop and firefighter because of our merged public safety model. But it was great to be back in person and, see some people and answer some questions, of course. Last Thursday night, there was a grand opening of the Tetra and AC hotels in Moffett Park. So it was actually, it's a pretty impressive kind of two hotels side by side, and of Marriott hotels, but kind of different levels. That's about 350 rooms, but it was a big party. They went all out as far as that's concerned. And it's great, to have those business travelers have a good location right in the heart of Moffett Park. And then, it also provides additional restaurants. It has a good cafe, so good coffee and Danish and pastries. So if you're looking for kind of a hideaway, and it actually has a lot of small meeting areas at the hotel, so inside and outside. And I thought that really, added to that architecture and kind of that feel for the hotel is pretty unique. So if you get a chance, visit that. Last weekend, Charles Street Gardens, it's our community gardens here, had their spring plant sale. Dropped by that, and that was both Saturday and Sunday, and lots of people out still planting for their spring and summer gardens. But it was good to see some of their members. I was one of the founding members for Charles Street Gardens many years ago, and happy to see that it's still very active as far as that's concerned. And then as far as this week, on Monday, Governor Newsom's office announced that California lawmakers appear unlikely to halt the scheduled increase of the state's gasoline tax in time to meet the May 1st deadline. The plan was, ultimately to hopefully pause that annual tax hike. And that was part of several bills introduced at the beginning of this year, kind of to ease the burden on residents, especially from the right, on how expensive gas prices have become. But, ultimately they weren't able to come to an agreement on that and move that forward. There's lots of different plans out there, conceivably offering payments to drivers, subsidizing public transit, and conceivably canceling that sales tax, at least for the next year. But all that had to be done in order for it to take effect by July 1st. Lawmakers would have needed to pass that legislation by this Sunday, and as an early budget item, but it doesn't look like they will be doing that. So lawmakers are still kind of working on their own legislation as far as to deal with the cost of gas and transit, and what they can do as far as sending money to our residents. So we'll see where those bills and that language goes over the next month or so, but that will be moving forward, relatively quickly in the next month or two in order to meet their June deadline. And then on Tuesday this week, council met and we had a fairly long session. We started off with a study session talking about a potential 2022 ballot measure, and that's to modify the real estate property transfer tax. So right now $1.10 is taken for every time a property is sold, and half of that goes to the county and half of that goes to the city. What we're doing, and a lot of other cities have done this, had this for years. So Mountain View, Palo Alto, San Jose put something in about a year ago. But Palo Alto and Mountain View had it for since the 80s, and ultimately what it does is it increases that amount, and there's lots of discussions from a city standpoint of what we can do to whether or not we should increase that amount. But we're talking about raising that to $5 or $10, which ultimately isn't that much money when you're talking about the sale of a $3 million home or something of that nature. And we would most likely put a floor on that. So right now, all properties that are sold actually have that transfer tax. So, even all the residential and all that, but this would conceivably, we set a floor at 2 million, 2.5, 3 million or something, and any property sold below that wouldn't have that transfer tax other than what was already existing, the $1.10 that was taken by the county. So, if we put anything in place, the county still takes their $1.10, except at that point they get the entire $1.10, and anything additional that we would put would actually come to us. So hopefully, it would be more than the 55 cents that we're getting currently for every 1,000. So we'll see where that goes. There will be an upcoming meeting where staff will kind of lay out additional options as well as do the results of some of the polling that we're putting out. And then as far as the main meeting is concerned, we had one of the students from Homestead High School came and talked about or recited a poem for Poetry Month. So April is Poetry Month, and there's lots of ways to celebrate Poetry Month. There's a haiku wall at the library right now. So if you want to try your hand at writing a haiku, the library is taking those submissions and conceivably posting them. You take a look at that wall and you'll see one that I created earlier this month, but we brought in a junior from the high school to ultimately read one of her poems. And so hopefully people enjoyed that. And then as far as the main meeting is concerned, we talked about several ordinances. The first one was related to fines for violations for a short-term rental ordinance. So it's basically to improve the compliance for our short-term residents, short-term rental ordinance. If people want to do Airbnb or VRBO, it needs to be hosted. So the owner needs to be on the property for those people renting. So whether or not that's an ADU or somebody renting the room, so we don't have what happened last year, which was a party renting out a place and having 100 people there, and ultimately someone got shot and someone actually died as far as that's concerned. So we're trying to make sure, improve the enforcement by increasing the number of fines as far as that's concerned. And then the other thing that we did was introduce an ordinance for single-use plastics. And so starting on June 1st, and this is somewhat in relationship to what the state has done. So there's state laws, and we've been talking about that. That was one of the things that we added as part of our climate action plan playbook. One of our actions that we're going to undertake over the last year and a half is to study that, do outreach, and then put an ordinance in place. Part of my advocacy was talking to the state, because doing it at a city level really didn't make sense. Doing it around the state, it's like if you have one city that's not giving out, plastic silverware unless it's requested, it makes sense that it's not just one city, it applies to all the cities at the same time. And so on June 1st, that state ordinance will go in place. And what we've done is kind of do something similar, except the way we made the fine is to make sure that it's basically just a fine that can be paid, as opposed to having to go to the court and pay that, because that would conceivably be a lot harder for city staff, because if it was actually taken to court, then and people conceivably had to pay their fine, but city staff would actually have to spend time doing that. So this is much better. We basically put something in place to have a series of increasing fines for restaurants or food places that violate this. But there's also a way for, and it's initially it's a warning and then conceivably going through fines, but it's a way for restaurants and other places that are providing food trucks and such, to also have an appeal process and kind of go through that from a city standpoint, as opposed to going into the court system, which has tons of issues and is way backed up as far as that's concerned. And then lastly, we looked at introducing an ordinance to change the appointment process. If a council member resigns, if there's an empty seat on council like we had last year, ultimately staff had some kind of a draft item, and council gave a lot of feedback on possible scenarios as far as that's concerned. Initially there were lots of issues last year, or earlier this year when we did that appointment, mainly because first there was the concept of ranked choice voting, and ranked choice voting makes sense when there's a few candidates and lots of people voting. When there's only 6 people voting, ranked choice voting doesn't really make sense. And then conceivably looking at a better way to deal with ties. And so we gave direction. We'll see what the final ordinance is sometime in the next month or so. on that and several options that council requested to vote on. And then yesterday in the morning, the BART Board of Directors passed its own mask mandate. So this is kind of, and it's similar to what LA County did, that they basically said, we want to go ahead and reinstate the mask mandate that we had last week. You know, we don't care. We understand that the CDC can't do it nationwide, but we think it's for the safety of our passengers to go ahead and reinstate that. So they did that, and they actually, you know, they give away free masks at the entrance to the BART station. So it make it as easy as possible for people to be masked while on BART. And then yesterday evening, council had a fairly long meeting, you know, about 3 hours, just on the workshop for the Moffett Park specific plan. And it was a land use workshop this time. So we talked about, you know, multiple things as far as, well, the main thing was kind of where the different neighborhoods are, and what they're trying to do is make 15-minute neighborhoods, and they've kind of named the different portions of the city of Moffett Park as they're looking at the new land use. They also talked about heights and kind of what the step, you know, when you're trying to create, you know, from the planning commission, you learn this. What you don't want to do is create a very tall building. What you want to do is do more of a wedding cake design, where, you know, you have a few stories and then a few stories more set farther back, so that it's not just a very large building right in front of you. And so that was one of the things, you know, talking about heights in Moffett Park. Right now, the tallest building is about 135 feet. And, you know, right next to Moffett Field, there are height restrictions based upon that you know, one of the local, the ALUC decides what the heights can be of buildings in the general area. And right now, the tallest building is 130 feet. And so we're setting different height limits, or basically looking at proposals for different height limits across Moffett Park. So 130, 160 feet, conceivably 200 feet or more, depending upon as you get farther and farther east, closer to Baylands Park. But then again, you also want to, from a council standpoint, we also gave direction that you can't just put all the height, you know, as far away from Moffett Park or from Moffett Field. What you also need to do is also look at, you know, making sure that you have a stepwise design going up to that. So it's interesting as you do kind of an urban plan for that whole area, but you know, it's looking at what they're requiring for heights, as well as, you know, looking for what we can add conceivably for libraries and park buildings along that area, where the mixed use is, where there needs to be retail, and also, you know, what some of the requirements are for big box. You know, initially staff had proposed 4 box stores, retail stores, at least 15,000 square feet. I think it's more important to at least have one that's above 50,000 square feet. So looking at a large grocery, because I think that's, if you're going to add, you know, up to, let's say, 60,000 people living in Moffett Park, and you already have people north of 101 that want a large grocery, you know, grocery outlet right at Tasman and Fair Oaks is only about 14,000 square feet. So you need a large Lucky or Whole Foods or Safeway in Moffett Park. And I think that was one of the big things that I really focused on. You could have several, 15,000 square foot stores that are pharmacies or something similar, actual large retail. But most importantly, I do think it's having a grocery there is critical for the long-term operation of Moffett Park and people living there, people working there, people that are going there and, to experience what's there. So, it was good talking about, the general land use, talking about heights and kind of talking about where things go. I think staff has actually come up with a very detailed plan go back and watch that meeting, go back and take a look at that draft presentation. I do think that there's a lot of information there, and I think it was, a good discussion overall. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly COVID numbers. From a national standpoint, we've now had over 81 million cases, positive cases of COVID. It's increased over 400,000 in the last week. That's up slightly over the previous week. We've had 257 million people vaccinated with at least one dose. That's over 82% of those 5 years and older with at least one dose. And nationally, 76% of adults are fully vaccinated. So that's fantastic. We still are having people pass away with COVID. And so we've now had 990,000 deaths. It's about 3,000 deaths in the last week. And then from a California standpoint, we've had 8.5 million positive cases. We continue to see increases on a day-by-day basis. We now have over 3,200 cases a day. That's up from 2,700 a week ago and 2,300 2 weeks ago a day. So ultimately we are seeing that uptick in cases, and ultimately, that doesn't really reflect the real case rates, mainly because you have so many people that are doing home testing as opposed to going to the hospital, going to the county to get tested. So the test case positivity average continues to increase. It's now 2.7%. So it was about 1% just a few weeks ago. So ultimately, COVID is here. COVID is back. We're still seeing fatalities. We had another 300 just in the last week from a statewide standpoint. So we've now reached more than 89,000 deaths related to COVID. And then from a county standpoint, our case count is now almost 318,000 that have had COVID. That's up 3,000 just in the last week. That's up from 2,000 a week ago and 1,500 2 weeks ago. So, definitely we're seeing more cases within the county, within the state, across the nation. This latest variant is a lot more transmissible. That being said, we're not seeing a vast increase in the number of hospitalizations, so that's positive. We are still seeing, people pass away with COVID. However, there were 8 additional deaths in the last week, that bringing our total to 2,251 deaths. As far as vaccinations, our county is still doing well. 94.5% of those 18 and older are fully vaccinated, and almost 70% of those that are eligible for the booster have received their booster. So, that's fantastic, and kudos to everyone who has been able to get their vaccine, get their booster, and protect themselves from that standpoint too. If they do get exposed, and you saw news reports earlier this week that there's estimates that 2/3 of the population have had COVID in the last 2 years. So whether or not they known it, whether or not they were testing for it, or whether or not they thought it was a minor cold, ultimately they think that 2/3 of the people in the U.S. have had COVID at this point. I continue to do a lot of advocating for our city, at the county level, talking to county health and our county supervisors. I talked to Dr. Cody last week, and, ultimately trying to get more information as far as when things will be opening up for our congregate shelters. What are we doing as far as making sure that boosters and testing is maintained in our different cities, for testing. The county is still doing COVID testing at the Sunnyvale Community Center on the 1st and 3rd Thursdays of the month, from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. They'll be back next Thursday on the 5th, and the appointments are available starting 5 days before the testing date. So go to scfreetest.org, and you can also see places in the county where you can actually pick up test kits if you want to do it at home. And then if you need to get vaccinated, if you need to get your booster, there's lots of discussions about boosters for the youngest in our population. And you can go to sccfreevax.org to get more information as far as that's concerned. Let's go ahead and talk about some upcoming events. So tomorrow morning, there will be, the grand opening or the grand reopening, really, of Fair Oaks Park, and that'll start at 9:30 a.m. and go to about 11:30 a.m. And so it's a dedication ceremony. There'll be musical performances, games, and activities. But it's not just Fair Oaks Park, but it's also that magical bridge playground. So it's ultimately made possible through donations from residents, but it was partnering with Magical Bridge to create that all-inclusive playground. Ultimately, how that came to pass, for those of you that don't know, is a Girl Scout came to City Council saying that they had heard about this concept of a all-inclusive playground where people, where kids in wheelchairs could still, be active in that playground. And, that Girl Scout, came to City Council, on my first night on City Council back in September of 2016 and said, I have a petition, I've got a petition together, and I would like to have this added to the city. And ultimately, from a city standpoint, we upgrade all of our parks, or we have a plan to upgrade all of our parks over the next 20 years. And that initiated that effort to make sure that one of the next parks that we were doing, which was Fair Oaks Park, added that Magical Bridge playground. And then it was raising the funds, and thanks to the county, specifically Supervisor, now Senator Cortese, for giving playground grants to our city and making sure that adding, so that was part of that funding. The city put in funding, but it's actually great to see. And so it'll be a big grand opening tomorrow morning. There's synthetic turf, there's a new dog park, there's new art that's on site, and of course the Magical Bridge playground. So hopefully for those of you that can make it, should be a lot of fun. Another thing happening tomorrow morning is the Sunnyvale Community Services Auxiliary has their spring pop-up sale event, and that'll be happening from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Murphy Park building. So not that far away from Fair Oaks Park, but it's where they sell their handcrafts, their baked goods, raising money for Sunnyvale Community Services, which is always good. They always have a quilt and their quilt raffle, which is always, pretty amazing. So if you get a chance, drop by Murphy Park on Sunnyvale Avenue and California Avenue to visit their pop-up, their spring pop-up. And then on next weekend, on Saturday, May 7th, the Sunnyvale Downtown Association will be hosting the Magic of Sunnyvale. So that is, magicians for the kids. There's wine for the parents. So definitely you can purchase your ticket in advance, and that'll be along Murphy Avenue, and a lot of the different restaurants partner with some of the wineries for that. So restaurants all along Murphy Avenue, as well as along Washington and other locations downtown. So great to see people back in person. And I think, some of their magicians from the past have been truly amazing. Definitely, if you have a chance, attend that event. And then on 2 weekends from now, Saturday, May 14th, is our cultural celebration, featuring, of course, Hands on the Arts, and that'll be from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the community center. There'll be lots of things to do. It'll be, Hands on the Arts for the kids, but there'll be roving entertainment. There'll be performances throughout the day, balloons, bubbles, lots of different things going on. So if you want to volunteer, go to the city website, and there's places to volunteer. But It'll be fun for the entire family. So definitely look forward to that. And then as far as upcoming council meetings, next Tuesday, we'll have another council meeting, May 3rd. And it'll start off with a study session talking about the housing element. And so they have a draft for our housing element update. And then as far as the main meeting, we'll be approving a draft 2022 Housing and Urban Development HUD, HUD, action plan. So this is where we get funds from the housing and urban development from a federal standpoint, and that's all based upon population, and figure out what programs that we end up sending this money to. So it's actually good from that standpoint. And then we'll also be reviewing the recommendations on naming the new city park. Lots of things happening with parks right now at 1 Redwood Place. So that's the old AMD site. That park will be opening up in June, but part of this is what the name of that park is going to be. And so that's the old AMD campus at right at Duane near Lawrence Expressway. That will be a 6.5 acre park. It'll have a dog park. It'll have other amenities, you know, picnic areas and playgrounds. And a large open field. So definitely look forward to that park opening up in June, but we'll be reviewing some the names for that park and deciding what that name will be on Tuesday night. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. If you have a question, go ahead and add it to the comments, and I will hopefully be able to get to it if everything is going correctly. Pat asked, when is the Fair Oaks Bridge going to be finished? That should be in June. So we've been waiting for that to be finished. It was delayed because of multiple things, supply issues. There were some scheduling issues with Caltrain as they were doing other construction work for the electrification. And then of course, there were some actually migratory birds that we actually had to deal with, so that we couldn't be doing construction there until they actually moved on. And then Jody asks, what were the names that the Parks and Rec Commission recommended for A&D Park? So the commission narrowed it down to 5 names. Shell Mound Park. So it's one of the, so that area was one of the 3 shell mounds in Sunnyvale that were found of the Loney Indians. Redwood Park, because of course the mature redwood trees that were actually preserved around the park, as well as around that entire site. So when AMD campus was there along Duane and completely around that whole area, there were lots of redwoods, and so those were maintained when the residential went in, as well as the park. And so Redwood Park is one of the options. Arquez Park, and that was mainly because Nellie Murphy Arquez, so one of the sisters of Martin Murphy, had a homestead located there. And so that was Arquez is a possibility. Manzanita Park, mainly because it's a native plant used by the Ohlonies. And then Duane Park, because of course Duane Avenue runs along the park on the north and the east, kind of the northeast portion of where the park is. So we'll see. We'll see what happens as far as when that, what the final name chosen will be. Julia asked, I saw the post about Sunnyvale sculptures. What is the city plan? So currently there's an online poll for suggestions on what represents Sunnyvale. And this is kind of one of the next things from a art master plan that we've talked about. We approved the art master plan over a year ago, but one of the first things we did was talk about, okay, what are the upcoming programs? So the first, of course, was the utility box art program, the Great Box Art Cover-Up that is actually occurring right now. And if you go downtown, this should be about the last weekend that those artists will be putting the final touches on their utility box art. But one of the next things that we talked about was sculptures, having several sculptures within the city. And, much like San Francisco had its hearts and people paint, basically do murals on the side or color or paint those different sculptures, so kind of the hearts. Same thing happened with the San Francisco, in San Jose with the sharks. And then you see that, cows in Chicago and other things. So if you have suggestions, if you want to take that survey, the survey ends on May 6th. So for those of you that are interested, go ahead and join that. And I think that's all the questions that I have this week. Let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again. The uncertainty of COVID continues to cause a certain amount of stress and concern in our community and the entire world for that matter. But I want you to know that no matter what the challenges we face them together. I'm proud of our city and how our residents have responded to COVID over the last 2 years or more. And I'm thankful for everyone who helps out in our community, showing their generosity and their empathy for everyone in our community. So new issues always come up, but your actions and your attitude make a difference. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Be kind, be generous, and have a great week. Goodbye.